On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, Lee and I talk about going back to school and reminisce a little bit about some of our school days memories. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization here at the Society, joined by my colleague, our Chief Operations Officer, Lee Sondano. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Joe. How are you doing?
Pretty well, thank you. And we're going to get into a little bit of, it's that time of year. We're going to talk about kind of going back to school. And we came up with this idea, let's be honest, kind of just sort of because we're out of other ideas and we needed to lay down a recording.
And school starting.
Right?
Yep.
It's opportune. But, the more I thought about it in preparation for this episode, it occurred to me that there is a Chestertonian connection here, and it has to do with gratitude. That, that which is forgotten is not valued, is not held in thanks. It's taken rather for granted. And so I thought, maybe this is something that kind of should be part of kind of the yearly cycle when parents are preparing to send their kids back to school, whether or not we have school-age children, to think back on those years of our lives when we were going to school and to be grateful for those opportunities, some of those great moments, great lessons, great teachers that we had. And so really just, taking stock and remembering and paying attention to seasons as they change in order to be grateful, not just taking it for granted, not missing those seasonal shifts that happen. I think that's a fundamentally Chestertonian way of being. And I thought that in as much as that is the case, this is an appropriate thing to do for our podcast here.
Perfect. I love it. The air here in Minnesota, I think we're going through a little cold spell, but it feels very fallish. This is one of the first days of school here. I'm on the campus of the Twin Cities Chesterton Academy and seeing a lot of the students outside on their lunch break, and it just feels very, very fallish today, Joe, very schooly. So this is a good fun podcast we're going to go through.
Yeah, I started. I saw some pictures in my Facebook feed of my my alma mater, my high school alma mater, where my brother now is the principal, and many fond memories. But I have a nephew and a niece who attend there as well right now, and they were going through kind of their fall pre-football season pep rally, the kind of start of the season pep rally, and part of all that, and. Yeah, it is getting to be that time of year. And I think we'll get into why, these memories are so impactful and so important as we go on. Before we do get to that topic, though, we do have a little bit of feedback from our recent episodes, specifically our episode on fake Chesterton quotes that you would have heard last week. And I wanted to
we've
share
heard
that
a lot of
with,
feedback on this one, Joe. We've even heard from staff a little bit too. There was some I think some responses of, wow, that was really fake, and that was a really good opportunity, I think, to talk through some of those things. But we'll get to the feedback here that I think is poignant and good for us to review. But lots of good feedback on that one, Joe. I wonder if people were just maybe slightly dumbfounded that some of those things Chesterton didn't say, or that maybe there's that many quotes on, what did you say, brainyquotes.com that have Chesterton quotes that are completely false. But either way, it was a really good discussion.
Yeah, I think, it was thought provoking for a lot of people. And just, this is a sort of an object lesson for the viewers and listeners that we really do value your feedback. We appreciate when you send your thoughts in. And we did receive a very thoughtful email from not your average listener, let us say, the former host of this very podcast, Nancy Carpentier Brown, who of course is a great Chestertonian. Yes, the biographer of Frances Chesterton, Gilbert's wife, and just a one of the great Chestertonians of all time, let's say. And Nancy very usefully, I think, just pointed out a couple of what she calls caveats about the episode. One being that, when we say that Chesterton didn't say any something, right? Of course, it's always difficult to prove a negative, and that would presume
Yeah.
if we were trying to make some kind of categorical absolute statement that such and such was not said by Chesterton, um, let's say according to certain methods of proof, we would need access to all the material. And the fact of the matter is, we just don't have it. We do not have everything that Chesterton ever said transcribed. That includes his written material, but also the many speeches that he gave. He was a speaker extraordinaire. He gave, you know, it's one of the things that's remarked about him in some biographies is just his intense speaking schedule. And so not all of these talks were even reported on in the news, let alone, it's very few of them where you have anything like lengthy transcriptions of quotations and things. We have kind of third hand parts of it. So that's a very valid point. That of course, we can't necessarily know with certainty when certain things are attributed to GK that they're not said by him. But nevertheless, I would say that we did model in that episode a good way of approach, which is to test the feasibility of something against the known diction and the known kind of patterns of speech and sentiments and ideas that Chesterton had. Um, Anything you wanna say to that particular point of Nancy's feedback, Lee?
I I was going to mention something very similar. I think that it's easier to interpret what Chesterton may or may not have said just because of his consistency of some of his writings and some of the other quotes that we were looking at. So, of course, we were we had our deduction hats on through that entire podcast. And Nancy's right. We don't really have written proof one way or another that he did or didn't say those things. But I think we can gather enough data on what's out there to realize whether or not Chesterton would have spoken of rain and rainbows, which
Right.
was one of the quotes last week that we talked about, and whether or not that sounds like him or that would have just been a one off that you would have never heard something similar of before. So a really good point, but at the same time, I think you and I deduced pretty well based on the information that we had.
Yeah, and so what we can say is we have no record of Chesterton saying certain things and then proceed from there, and it's just the honest way of approaching that, as Nancy points out, is to say that,
Yep.
evidence may come to light. One feedback piece that we did receive, was based upon, that famous story of Chesterton, um, you know, the leading lights of the day being asked what's wrong with the world, and Chesterton writing in a note that simply said, "Dear sirs, I am sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton." Um,
Hmm.
and that's an example where we can say that we don't have firm record that this happened, that Chesterton wrote this, that Chesterton said this. However, if we were to bring back our plausibility chart from last week, that would be an absolute S tier for me. And as a matter of fact, in my estimation, it or something like it probably happened. It's attested early enough. It seems to be talked about early enough, and it would not surprise me if we just did not have written record of this having happened when, in fact, it did. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we learn about Chesterton when we research him intensely and kind of look at his archival material and so forth is that he was a very generous guy with his time and with his talent. And when a new magazine or a new newspaper was starting out with a very small circulation, he would lend to it. He would write an essay. He would, and some of these journals that Chesterton was published in may have popped up, lasted for a handful of issues, and then folded because they weren't growing in the circulation that they needed or some other economic concern. And so it would not surprise me at all. Yeah, I mean that there's a lot of Chesterton out there probably that just has not been collected because they were these very small concerns that never really got started and never even captured the notice of archival librarians to preserve for future generations. So it's something
Sure.
worthwhile bearing in mind. Yeah, and Nancy also had a piece on artificial intelligence, which is a very natural fit to our
Oh,
previous
goodness.
conversations,
I
Lee.
I
And
had a
so,
I had a note on I had a note on this, Joe. If you remember, we in the notes, I actually had a note. I wanted to talk about AI and some of these quotes and how the AI generation models are taking these as truth, and we just didn't have time. So I feel bad for this one, Nancy, that you even brought this up because boy, this was on the list, and we were going to talk about it.
yeah, and to that point, I would just say, this is the importance of having, the Society of G.K. Chesterton, of having, knowledgeable people who are dedicating, whether it be Dale or Nancy or myself or the great Peter Floriani or Geir Hosnes in Norway, all the Chesterton, researchers who spend time
Yeah,
and can help, you know, dig up what we can to identify and sort and just know Chesterton's voice because as Nancy points out, it's going to become this compounding problem where already extant misattributed quotes are getting, let's say, reaffirmed or reattested by AIs simply making mistakes. But an equally dire threat to me is AIs hallucinating quotations, making them up out of whole
yeah,
cloth, and yet making them up in a way that is sort of a signature talent of AI right now, which is mimicry, right? It can mimic the
yep,
voice and the tone and the style very well, of an extant source sometimes. And so well observed by Nancy that this is another element that we need to be increasingly on guard for and on the watch for. And again, viewers, listeners, we welcome your questions, we welcome your feedback, we welcome any concerns or anything you spot out there that's being attributed to Chesterton that's maybe it doesn't quite pass the smell test, it doesn't
yeah,
pass
yeah.
muster. Send that to us at podcast@chesterton.org, and maybe your future feedback will end up on a future episode.
Yeah, I do want to say, just because we didn't mention it last time, that sometimes AI doesn't discriminate on the content that it's ingesting to serve up, like you said, in mimicry and things like that. And I ran across a website that was the one that I referenced that we didn't have time to get to, that was talking about Chesterton in AI, where he references these thinking machines and science fiction and things like that.
Mhm.
Clearly anachronistic. I mean, it's not even the time period. I don't even know if the term science fiction existed during Chesterton's time. Maybe it did, but I'm not sure if it was something that he would use on a normal basis. So, but if you get to the bottom of the article, it's a total April Fool's joke, right?
Yeah.
But AI doesn't know that, and so that was my point of caution, is that sometimes you can even find a reference to a quote, and it is even referenced via AI, but sometimes that reference as a blog post is an absolute forgery.
Yeah, and again, it's just to do your due diligence. We encourage everybody out there to just read discerningly, and if
Yeah,
something strikes you as maybe a little bit off or odd, uh, trust that instinct and go with it and reach out. Let us know. Ask somebody who maybe has access to the resources to run it to ground if there is an attestation for it. But in a lot of these cases,
indeed.
we can find kind of the first forensic path, but increasingly that's going to be dangerous because of these kind of recursive modalities. There's that famous story of the Wikipedia article that became the source of a journalistic article and then cited the journalistic article as a source in the Wikipedia article, and a court upheld it.
Yep.
It was absurd that the court basically said, "Oh yeah, that's a valid uh, inferential chain." So it's a whole thing, and I want to
Yeah,
move on from that, but again, this is why feedback is so valuable because it helps us, and we will be returning to these topics in the future. Make no mistake, there's
absolutely.
going to be plenty of
Absolutely.
opportunities to do so. Yeah. So
Definitely.
on to this topic today, Lee. We're going to talk about going back to school and sort of just the back to school period. I mentioned why at the beginning, kind of these thoughts on gratitude, but and we talked a little bit about fall. But any other just initial thoughts to set us up before we kind of delve into it here?
Yeah, just, I don't remember, well, I don't know what you may have done when you were younger, but just the school supplies everywhere. It's
Yeah,
just one of those things. You walk into a store and you see all the the schools and the pencils and the back in our day, Joe, it was probably Trapper Keepers and everything else,
Trapper
and it
Keepers,
just
pencil
you've got that
cases.
kind of
Yeah,
scent of school right coming up, and so that's what's really exciting about this time of year too. Is I almost feel that even now I almost feel that it's something new. Something new is about to begin, and you can start fresh again, and that's really exciting. And I think you're going to get to it here a little bit with some writings from GKC and gratitude, but just really grateful for that season. That there's an opportunity of newness that always presents itself during a new school year.
yeah. I've been putting off a couple of projects, personal kind of research and writing projects, and I caught the bug this week because it just what you're saying, the material aspects of sort of that back to school
Mhm.
transition. Were kind of running through my mind, and I remembered vaguely in the back of my mind, like, I have index cards somewhere in my house, and, I went digging for them, and it was great. I spent some good amount of time on Saturday just sort of, putting together some notes on index cards and using my different colored pens as I was wont to do, back when I made the time to do these things. And it was just so rewarding and refreshing.
Definitely.
And so it's a great opportunity, viewers, listeners. This is why I think, these natural cycles of seasons that transition, there's a reason you do spring cleaning and fall cleaning. And we have
Yeah.
these opportunities. So again, even if you don't have school age kids yourself, and this isn't a time of proximate preparation for anything for you, take the time, take the moment, think back to things like we're going to talk about in this episode, and then take some action based upon that. This is a great time to start that project that you've been putting off, to put your put your nose back to the grindstone and start working on it again. Like, summer break is over. That kind of
Yep.
push that we all need. Um, you know, I think we have to start with Chesterton here, Lee, and famously, Chesterton was not much of a great student, but, you know, he does have some
Good.
very
There's hope
fond.
for us then, Joe.
There
There's
is
hope for a
there
lot of
is
us.
yes, indeed, and, well, I can say that, nor was I. We'll maybe talk about that in a little bit, but, Chesterton has a great passage that I think is really typical of the way that he remembered his school days, and also it's very charming. It captures a lot in here. So you'll hear in here about him being a bad student. You'll hear in here about his paradoxical way of viewing things and how he makes us think of things in different ways. But also, one particular teacher for whom he had fondness. And one of the things that you and I are going to talk about is, a teacher that we had in the past who maybe made more of an
Mm.
impact than others. This is from the autobiography of G.K. Chesterton, and I'll make sure the exact reference, is in the show notes. I don't have it handy right now, but he wrote, "The idea that I had come to school to work was too grotesque to cloud my mind for an instant. It was also in too obvious a contrast with the facts and the result. I was very fond of my friends, though, as is common at such an age, I was much too fond of them to be openly emotional about it. But I do remember coming, almost seriously, to the conclusion that a boy must go to school to study the characters of his schoolmasters. And I still think
Mm.
that there is something in it. After all, the schoolmaster is the first educated grown up person that the boy comes to see constantly after having been introduced at an early age to his father and mother. And the masters of St. Paul's, Chesterton schools, were very interesting, even those of them who were not so eccentric." Just to pause here at this point of the quote, so he's basically making the point that he before this passage, he's relating an anecdote where one of the masters asks a student, "Why do you go to school?" And the boy answers, "To learn." And Chesterton says, he never would have come to that conclusion himself because it didn't happen for him, as he describes in
Great.
this quote. So,
That's great.
but he does say it's fascinating. He still nevertheless decided that even if he wasn't seemingly learning from the subject matter, a boy must go to school to study the characters of his schoolmasters. What a great quote.
Great quote.
Any thoughts on that part of his observation before we
Well,
move
just as
on?
you were reading it, I was thinking how true that is. Individual lessons may or may not fade. You know, individual homework assignments and reports and things like that may or may not fade. But I will always remember, you know, my teachers, the people, you know, their
Yeah,
characters and their strengths. And no, that's really insightful. And yeah, we'll be visiting that in a little bit as well. But I think those are the lasting qualities, especially when you get a good teacher, you know, and especially when you've got a really good, virtuous teacher that you can kind of carry with you for the rest of your life. It's really impactful.
absolutely. Well, on then, he continues to one very distinguished individual. My own personal debt is infinite. I mean, the historian of the Indian Mutiny and the campaigns of Caesar, Mr. T. Rice Holmes. He managed, heaven knows how, to penetrate through my deep and desperately consolidated desire to appear stupid, and discover the horrible secret that I was, after all, endowed with a gift of reason above the brutes. He would suddenly ask me questions 1,000 miles away from the subject at hand, and surprise me into admitting that I had heard of the Song of Roland, or even read a play or two of Shakespeare. Um,
Beautiful.
so yeah, the one teacher who, in a very appreciative way, that Chesterton mentions is this Mr. T. Rice Holmes, and to whatever extent he was instrumental in bringing us the great intellect of GKC, I think we have to be thankful to him as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, with that kind of as background, then, and given what you just mentioned, Lee, I'd like to take our kind of topics that we were going to talk about just for the next few minutes in reverse order. So I mentioned kind of a
Hmm.
favorite teacher, a favorite class, and then or a favorite course or subject, and then a favorite specific lesson. But I think that really the teachers have to be the capstone because those as we just pointed out with that quote, sometimes it's just that character of a teacher who that sticks with you and makes an impact. And I'd like to. I think it'd be
Hmm.
better to finish on that note. So, yeah, do you have any particular memories of a lesson that just stuck with you that it kind of represented maybe a paradigm shift in your mind?
Boy, I do. This is fun. Um,
Yeah.
so this was in college. I went to a secular university in Las Vegas, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and was taking a lot of courses. I was an English major, and there was one summer course that I was interested in taking just to kind of fill my plate a little bit, and it was in a course of something I never heard of before, Joe. It was called hagiography,
Mm,
which of course is the study of saints' lives, which I didn't know at the time, and it was more on the kind of the literary aspects of hagiography and things like that. And I remember my teacher, he was this amazing English professor, and we were talking through these early saints' lives, especially in the medieval times, and just these amazing, outrageous stories of saints water skiing on otters and all kinds of amazingly fun things. But I remember leaving that class thinking that there was a lot more to Christianity than I thought, and a lot of those stories were ringing true and beautiful, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced it. Of course, this was when I was a Protestant back in university, but really that was probably one of the most impactful classes, and probably the one of the greatest single lessons was just some of the writings of Saint Francis of Assisi. And again, reading this in the context of literature, in the context of this kind of wide open, this is what scribes used to kind of follow around and take down in medieval times, and but just how God was able to kind of penetrate my heart through that class, and came out really with more of an understanding of the beauty of the faith. Maybe that's the best way to put it: is the beauty of the
mm,
faith that I hadn't seen before in a hagiography class. And most people that I tell that I took a hagiography class, first of all, they say, "What is that?" And the
yeah,
second thing they say is, "Why was the university in Las Vegas teaching hagiography?" I don't know, Joe, but I took it and it was great.
that's
That was
awesome.
probably one of my
Yeah,
favorite classes. Yeah.
that's really cool. I remember. So this was in a course that I took. It was a graduate course on poetry, that I took, and very narrow course. It was on modern poetry and kind of different ways of interpretation, and it was focusing specifically on three poets. In fact, Yeats, Seamus Heaney, and W.H. Auden. And
Hmm.
I loved the entire course, but there was one lesson in particular that just stuck with me. So the professor had this kind of way of teaching what he called interpretive heuristics, or ways of kind of cracking open the text, and his way of describing it was great. He said that, like, if you pay attention to the shift in diction that happens through a line, or if you pay attention to a switch in point of view, or if you pay attention to a jump in time, it's in those spaces that interpretation takes place, that interpretation begins.
Hmm.
And he illustrated this with his own chart of what he called the um, symbolic, iconic, semiotic heuristic applied to the Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. And I just remember it was like lightning on the brain. It was like suddenly realizing that there's a way of reading poetry that this is after already for me 8 years of upper education. It hadn't occurred to me yet, even though I loved English. I loved to study and read poetry, and I was sort of very much ensconced in kind of a new critical kind of approach. But this just opened up kind of a different way of close reading, a different, and this teacher didn't, this professor didn't like exclude close reading in the new critical modality. And sorry if, by the way, for viewers and listeners, if none of this makes any sense. All that I'm saying is that it it made me realize that you could take something like a poem and by applying yourself to it, um, actually do something with it, actually get more meaning out of
Hmm.
it, or get applied meaning out of it in a way that wasn't navel gazing or self-congratulatory, all of the negative things that we tend to think about critics, right? That there actually is a reverent way of doing this. And I just remember that one class of one course just totally, it was great. I walked out of that class, and even the world had changed. And I don't mean that
Hmm.
in too much of an exaggerative way. Like, I went out and I just remember, like, the campus looking more beautiful than it had before, because, like, my mind was just excited by this possibility. It was really fun.
That is beautiful. We should do another podcast episode of some of the poems or the books that we had maybe read during college or on campus that kind of just you explaining that was I remember I would sit down and read through a work and my I felt like my mind was kind of open for the first time, and so that's fun. So again, for viewers and listeners who aren't English majors, you either get it or you don't, and Joe and I are both English majors. So strap in, it's going to be a fun ride. No, that's really good. And I remember yeah, I mean, I had a lot of professors like that were able to really um you look at poetry on the page, you look at drama on the page, you look at fiction on the page, and it's one thing. I think for a lot of us it's consumer driven.
Mhm.
When that shift happens from consumer to um, just realizing the depth and the breadth and the beauty of these things and of our humanity, it really just opens up a completely different world. And yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, great. So we talked about I guess, a particular course there, or maybe we did a class. But is there another one that you're thinking, Joe, that's one of your favorites from the old school days?
Um, oh gosh. I mean, I guess, particular, so this was sort of, I was thinking, more refined subject sort of thing, and then broader than that, maybe a particular syllabus, or a particular, was there something on a larger scale that made a change?
Hmm.
And yeah, for me, I would say there was a course that I took in undergrad, a semester elective on um, American Catholic literature. And I brought this up before, actually, when we had our interview, or we were talking at some point about. It was either when we talked to Cy Kellett, or we were talking about Cy Kellett's talk at the conference this year on Walker Percy, and I mentioned I always bring this up and recommend it. There's a 4-part biography of Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, Flannery O'Connor, and Walker Percy. It's by Paul Ellie, and it's called The Life You Say
Hmm.
May Be Your Own. And that was one of the core texts that we read in this course. But we also read O'Connor's short stories, her 2 novels, Mystery and Manners, her book of things on that, and then we read, uh, a couple Percy novels and some of his nonfiction. It was a very reading intense course, especially for an undergraduate. I was reading a lot, um, but just really enjoying it, and,
Hmm.
it it really did help propel me. At the time, I was a philosophy major and you know, I was studying in the seminary with the intention of becoming a priest, and so but I think when
Hmm.
I eventually landed up after discerning out of grad school and stuff, when I eventually landed back in, graduate school for English, it was partly because of this course, because this course had taught me not only reminded me that I love literature, but reminded me a particular way that I love literature, which is not necessarily the way that
Hmm.
everybody loves literature. I love literature as connected and embedded within history, right? It's one thing to read something and appreciate its timelessness in the story, and that's great, and that's the way that I read a lot of my favorite things to read, like The Lord of the Rings. When I read The Lord of the Rings, I don't really care, that it's kind of ahistorical. It sits above. It's transcendent in
Sure.
that way. But on the other hand, I love a book like All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren that is just so rooted in not just a time, but a place, the American South in a particular time, and, all that it means. It's just, yeah, it's that kind of reading really thrills me as well. So,
Hmm.
that was the course that kinda really taught me about that, like, these 4 people, particularly Walker Percy and Dorothy Day, they could not have written what they wrote at any other time and place, I really don't think. As
Hmm.
transcendent as what comes out of their writing is, they're just so much of the 20th century Southern Catholic Gothic tradition, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. Boy, so for courses for me, one course that's always going to stand out is just kind of life changing, and it's funny how we have a similar vein in some of our stories, Joe. I've only heard kind of bits and pieces of that, but I was dead set on going to seminary out of high school and overseas in Belgium to an international theological seminary that I was yeah just really excited about doing, and it just happened that it just didn't work out, and I ended up at a
Mhm.
community college for my first couple of years in Las Vegas, and I one of the courses that I think changed my life was English 101, Mr. Gates. If he's still around and you're listening, Mr. Gates, you were amazing. But I was in one of those moments in my life where I was really contemplating where I was going to go and what my future was going to be like. I think like a lot of freshmen are taking all the 101 courses. And of course, there I'm sitting in an English 101 course. I'm flipping through an English 101 book, right? And why this is so special to me, Joe, is because this is my first, the first time that I met G.K. Chesterton. So
Right.
flipping through an English 101 book in Las Vegas, Nevada, and ran across his poem, The Donkey, which for those of you who haven't heard The Donkey, it's it just spoke to me at the time, and I think it was even then Chesterton was kind of reaching out and saying, "This is it," which was really fantastic. And I really wanted to include poetry in this episode, Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and read the donkey for those listeners
Sure.
that haven't heard it. But this is what I ran across in that English 101, just flipping through those pages, contemplating life and my future and kind of what it meant for me not going to seminary and what God had in store for me. And here goes, the donkey. When fishes flew and forests walked, and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry, and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody of all four-footed things. The tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will, starve, scourge, deride me. I am dumb. I keep my secret still. Fools, for I also had my hour, one far fierce hours and sweet. There was a shout about my ears and palms before my feet. And I read that and I said, who wrote that? And it was a guy named G.K. Chesterton. And back then we're talking early 2000s, and I did, research online, and that's how I found the EWTN show with Dale, and started recording that on my TiVo Joe as much as I could, because it was kind of in the middle of the night, and used
Yep.
to watch those and just became obsessed with Chesterton. So just really neat how God uses these little moments, even in a secular environment in college for me, to really just speak to me and speak to my heart, and bring something in that I thought wasn't there. Here's this English author. I was flipping through a book who clearly was Christian, writing about a donkey having maybe being interpreted as one of the dumb animals of the world, of the earth, and but he had his hour, and and it was a
Yep.
godly hour, and I think that's really good for a lot of students to remember, as they're going through these classes, and some of them might seem daunting, or might seem like, why are we learning about this or that, is how God can speak through these moments and these people, and this literature, and it's just really powerful. So yeah, favorite course will always be English 101, where I discovered G.K. Chesterton.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we're gonna, cap this off now with what I said was sort of the coup de grace conversation of that one teacher that maybe made an impact in a special way. Just like for Chesterton, it was Mr. Holmes there, T. Rice Holmes. But before we get into that, just as a reminder at this point in the episode, viewers, listeners, well, let me do actually two reminders. The first being commercial. Like, subscribe, share this if you're enjoying this conversation. We know that it's sort of personal on Lee and my part, but we hope that you can see something of value coming out of it for you, which is a reminder. And that's what we try to have, just these little reminders for people of how to be more Chestertonian. And so please do like, subscribe, share this with your friends, and take this opportunity now. Pause the episode if you haven't been tracking along and you can't think of, well, what was it for me? What was one of those moments that clicked? What was one of those things that stuck with me? Take some time, reflect upon this. There's value in doing so. First of all, it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's like I said, you can't be thankful for what you forget, for what you don't remember and call to mind. You have to call something to mind in order to be thankful for it. Um, as a matter of fact, if you want my theological nerdism right here, that's part of the way that the Eucharist, the Mass, is structured for those of us that are Catholics. But basically all traditional liturgy, you do the anamnesis, you do the memorial, the remembering, and then you give thanks. That you do the Thanksgiving
Mm.
sacrifice. But so you have to recall it to be thankful for it, first of all. But second of all, yeah, if you have kids in your life, you can help share this with them. It does stay with you. I know that maybe you're not appreciating it right now. Just like Chesterton said, he never dreamed that learning was part of going to school. But clearly, there in his autobiography, all those years later, it had made an impact, even on him, even despite his studied,
Mm-hmm.
what did he call it? His studied determination or desire to be stupid. Um, so it will make an impact. And yeah, with that, I think we can go on to then kind of that last thing. What about a particular teacher, Lee? Anybody who maybe had that more profound impact than others in the classroom?
Yeah. So again, early stages of my college career, was interested in taking an introduction to Shakespeare course, and was introduced to a man named Dr. Carlos Campo, who was amazing. He's actually the chief executive officer now of the very prestigious Bible Museum in Washington D.C. We try to keep in contact with each other every once in a while. And so, Dr. C, if you're listening to this, hello. But just fantastic. He studied drama, and he was the type that would walk into the classroom. And of course, you're studying Shakespeare, and I think for a lot of people that don't have exposure to Shakespeare, it seems like a daunting task. And he just made not only Shakespeare come alive and the words off the page come alive, but he made it important. like really, really important. And I remember I'd see him in the hallway, before class started, and it almost looked like he was shadow boxing with himself, speaking lines back and forth to himself in Shakespeare, just getting ready for the class and to teach it. And it was just a fantastic vision of why these things, why beauty, why art, why culture are so important to us and to our humanities. And it really clicked for me. But that wouldn't have been possible without people like Dr. Carlos Campo, and without people that had that type of zeal for life, and
Mm.
for the arts. So I took as many courses as I could from him. And he was also a great Christian as well, which I found out a little bit later, which, colors everything when you're going into that mindset of interpretation, especially with Shakespeare, and you have someone that's also of the faith. And it was really beautiful. So definitely my top, will probably be my top for forever. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, for me, I have to go back to high school. And viewers, listeners, I did not go to a Chesterton Academy. I didn't have a time machine in order to make that happen. Chesterton Academy didn't exist yet. I did go to a very good high school, a small town Catholic high school, and really, I can be grateful for everything that I learned there and for all the courses that I took there. A bit of a quirky bunch of teachers from time to time, but there was one particular teacher. He was my senior year English teacher, Mr. Rapella, George Rapella, and he had been there since the mountain was there. He had taught, our friends' parents who were themselves Vietnam vets when they were in high school, and so he had just he'd been there for years and years, decades and decades. He really cared about the students. That was the first thing that I think
Mm,
made a big impact on me. He just sort of cared in this deep way. But the thing that I think most made an impact on me, I wouldn't have been able to say what it was at the time, but in the years since reflecting upon it, he was the first teacher in my life in any subject. And this is kind of a sad thing to admit to, that it was my senior year English class in high school. He was the first teacher in my life who taught in anything like the Socratic method. And
mm,
because of that sort of Socratic method, it wasn't a studied or deliberate Socratic method. It was just that what I could have articulated at the time was that what I have to say is valuable to this learning process, right? And he was the first teacher who really kind of made me feel that way, as opposed to you got to just get the work done. You got to learn this stuff. You're sort of in the passive recipient mode. No, in Mr. Rapella's class, it was about what insights you could bring to the text, what you could bring to the interpretation of literature. And it was just such a valuable thing, an empowering thing for me. And so
mm,
it became kind of the fundament of how I would go on to learn, because I was a bad student, most not bad, but I was not a great student until I got to college, and then suddenly, I was a very good student, and I think that this was part of that important transition
mm,
because he put me in ownership of my learning. He made me part of the experience of learning and made me an active participant rather than just sort of a consumer, like I said, a passive recipient of knowledge. And so I went on to learn that way, and I actually did learn after that, in a very valuable way. So I'm very grateful for that, and also it later when I could put terms to it after I learned what the Socratic method was, then I could actually say that, like, "Oh, yeah, this is why it's so valuable. This is why it's so valuable because it engages the learner in a different way and makes them an active co-participant in the, knowledge acquisition, process, so to
yeah,
speak." So, uh, yeah, that he just made a huge impact. I mean, God knows he's probably still there. He's like I said, he just seemed to be more a force of nature than a teacher. But very very fond memories. I know he was a favorite of many of my contemporaries as well. But thanks, Mr. Rappel, for that.
awesome. Yeah, I think we all are looking for um, that Dead Poet Society teacher,
Yeah,
and I think you and I probably found that in a lot of English courses, which just goes to prove you that English degrees are still some of the best degrees that you can get. And I'd
It
encourage all of you that are still searching for a degree, look at an English degree.
it's gonna be, I know that, if I had to ask this question of friends of mine, they would probably mention a math teacher. So largely it depends on what you're into and where you're going in life. But I think that,
Agreed. Agreed.
again, one of those things, that again is why are we talking about this rather than just me and Lee, navel gazing or or whatever you might think this is. It's not about that. This is about, first of all, the value of memory, the value of calling these things to mind to be grateful for them, but also to appreciate what is there right now. And so, just remember, if maybe your child's education, you think that the teacher is giving too much homework, which again won't happen if you send them to a Chesterton Academy. But if you think that, what's going on in your kid's education, maybe they're in grade school and there's too much homework, or the teacher's too demanding, or the teacher's too lax, or the teacher's too this, that, or the other thing. I'm not saying give them the benefit of the doubt, but recognize the good ones. So if a teacher is badly performing, you're the primary educator of your children. Make sure that you step in and rectify it to the extent that you can. But if we're going to complain about anything, it puts an onus on us to be grateful where we can. And so when you have those good teachers, make sure that they hear it, because they don't hear enough. The
Yeah.
the the good
Yeah.
ones kind of get lumped together, I think, with the bad sometimes, and that's a travesty. That's a shame. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, thank a teacher.
And I
That's
think
that's a good
too,
lesson.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's a good reminder too, just in this season that we're in, and why it's exciting to kind of talk about this, and especially because, the Chesterton School Network is such a big part of what we do now as an apostolate. Is just hopefully this isn't too far fetched thinking. Just that holiness of the season that we're in, of just the
Mhm.
season of starting learning again, and maybe it's a good reminder for those of us that are older, or those of us that are now sending kids to school, and maybe they're wrapping up school and they're seniors, or they're just starting school, is taking the time to, like Joe, you've been saying this whole time, to appreciate how we got here and what we had in the past, and really just use the season to take the time and remember those things in a spirit of gratitude.
Yeah. The when you think about the school year system, the way that school years are structured and such, there's such a value to making a beginning, right? And and part
Yeah,
of part of what we
yeah,
lose, I mean, yeah, okay, Lee, we have fiscal years or whatever in our jobs, or there's all sorts of
yep,
things that adults could take advantage of, but there's that unique thing of a fresh syllabus, a new plan of learning for a year and making a beginning. And if you're an adult out there and you feel like, oh gosh, I haven't learned something in a long time. I haven't read a new book. I haven't, discovered something
mm,
new in such a long time. It's probably because you haven't made a beginning. You haven't started. And so take this opportunity
right,
to write it out. Here's my reading plan for the academic year. Here's something I'm going to learn. I'm going to, take up Mandarin or whatever. So I think it's just
yeah,
it's a great opportune time of year, and I hope that you will take advantage of it. Any last thoughts before
right.
we wrap up though today, Lee?
No, this was great. It was really fun walking through favorite teacher, favorite course, favorite class. Just to echo Chesterton's sentiments here, that it's good to remember those things and those people and those courses that helped us penetrate through our deep and desperately consolidated desires to appear stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for a fun discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. We'll see you soon.
And viewers and listeners, thank you. Please do once again like this podcast, share it with your friends, leave a comment below, shoot us your feedback to podcast@chesterton.org. And make sure that you're inviting others to listen to this program, because as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.